There was exactly one being in Greek mythology who managed to bring Zeus to his knees, and he wasn't a god or a hero. Typhon rose as the last and greatest child of Gaia, a creature so vast that his 100 serpent heads were said to brush the stars, each one roaring in a different animal's voice. When he came for Olympus, the other gods didn't stand their ground. They fled to Egypt and hid themselves inside animal disguises, leaving Zeus to face him alone. And Typhon won that first exchange decisively, tearing the sinews from Zeus's limbs and hiding them away, leaving the king of the gods helpless on the ground until Hermes and Pan managed to recover what had been stolen. Zeus rose again, and the battle that followed ended with Typhon buried beneath Mount Etna, whose eruptions were said, for centuries afterward, to be nothing more than Typhon still struggling beneath the rock. Here's the detail almost nobody connects until you say it out loud. Typhon didn't just nearly end the reign of Zeus, he also became the father of nearly every monster that follows in this story. Which means before we meet any of them individually, we've already met their origin. Take his daughter, the Sphinx, stationed outside the gates of Thebes by Hera as a punishment against the city, though some accounts credit Ares instead. She didn't chase anyone, she simply blocked the road and asked a single riddle: what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening, and killed anyone who answered wrong. When Oedipus finally answered correctly, naming man, who crawls as an infant, walks upright in his prime, and leans on a cane in old age, the Sphinx's response wasn't rage. She threw herself from her rock and died, as if her entire existence had only ever been conditional on staying unbeaten. Then there's the Hydra of Lerna, coiled in a poisoned swamp where both breath and blood were lethal, long before you got close enough for the heads to matter. Sources disagree on the count, anywhere from 5 heads to 100, though Hesiod settled on 9, one of them immortal, but everyone agrees on the real problem. Sever 1 head and 2 grow back in its place, meaning a straightforward fight only made the creature stronger the longer it dragged on. Heracles solved it by having his nephew Iolaus seal each wound with fire the instant a head fell, stopping the regrowth cold before burying the immortal head under a boulder for good. Even that victory didn't end cleanly. Decades afterward, arrows Heracles had dipped in the Hydra's poison came back around, through an entirely separate betrayal, to end his own life. The Hydra, in a sense, outlived its own death. His son the Chimera terrorized the region of Lycia for years before King Iobates finally sent someone he fully expected not to return. Hesiod describes the creature as a lion at the front, a goat through the middle, and a serpent for a tail, breathing fire the entire length of it. Bellerophon's advantage was the winged horse Pegasus, letting him attack from above and out of range of the flame. And his solution to finishing the fight was almost absurdly simple: a lump of lead mounted on his spear, driven into the creature's fire-breathing throat, where its own heat melted the metal, and finished the job from the inside. And then there's Cerberus, stationed not to attack visitors, but to control which direction they were allowed to travel, welcoming to the dead heading into the underworld, and lethal to anyone living who tried to leave it. Heracles' final labor required capturing him with bare hands and no weapons, which he managed through sheer wrestling strength, under Persephone's condition that no lasting harm come to the animal. Every other hero who needed to get past him used a completely different trick. Orpheus simply played him to sleep with the lyre, while the Sibyl offered drugged honey cakes instead, as if the ancient storytellers understood that nothing guarding a threshold that important could have just one weakness. Step outside Typhon's bloodline and a second pattern emerges: women transformed not by fate, but by the jealousy or judgment of the gods around them. Scylla once lived as a nymph, admired enough to draw the attention of the sea god Glaucus, until jealousy turned her into something with 6 long necks, each mouth lined with 3 rows of teeth, anchored in a cave positioned at exactly shipdeck height. By the time Odysseus passed beneath her, she took 6 of his men at once, still calling his name as they were lifted away, a moment he later called the hardest thing he witnessed across 10 years of catastrophe, worse even than the Cyclops or the underworld itself. Medusa's story starts the same way. She served as a priestess of Athena until Poseidon assaulted her inside Athena's own temple, and the goddess's response was to punish Medusa rather than the god responsible, transforming her so that anyone who met her gaze turned instantly to stone. Perseus only survived by never looking at her directly, using a polished bronze shield as a mirror. Even severed, Her head kept working as a weapon, and from her neck, in the same instant, Pegasus was born. Her death didn't end anything so much as start something new. Lamia's transformation carries perhaps the cruelest origin of all. Once a queen of Libya and a lover of Zeus, she lost every child she had the moment Hera discovered the affair. What Zeus offered afterward wasn't comfort, it was the ability to remove her own eyes and put them back at will, meaning she slept blind and only saw the world on her own terms. For centuries, Greek parents invoked her name as a warning to children, proof that her real legacy was never epic poetry, but the shape of a fear left outside the bedroom door. A third group of monsters were never beings at all. They were forces of nature that storytellers gave a face to. Charybdis had no face to give. Ancient geographers placed her in a narrow strait, where the water itself was said to swallow the sea 3 times a day and spit it back out as a violent whirlpool. There was no creature to outsmart, only timing and distance. Odysseus survived his second encounter by clinging to a fig tree over the vortex until the wreckage floated back to the surface. The sirens worked through sound alone, their island pale with the remains of everyone who'd tried to reach them before, proof that changed nothing. Odysseus sealed his crew's ears with wax and had himself bound to the mast. Orpheus, sailing past separately with the Argonauts, simply played loud enough to drown them out entirely. And the Hecatonchires stand as the most literal force of nature among them, 300 armed, 50-headed beings so overwhelming that their own father imprisoned them at birth. Freed by Zeus to fight beside the Olympians, each one hurled 300 boulders at once, deciding the war through sheer volume alone. Not every threat needed a curse or a monstrous birth at all. Some were simply other beings, encountered as enemies. The Laestrygonians weren't a single creature but an entire civilization of giants, and their trap was pure geography, a harbour closed in by cliffs with only one narrow way out. 11 of Odysseus's 12 ships sailed in before anyone understood. Giants lining the clifftops answered with boulders the size of millstones, ending most of the fleet within a single afternoon, the worst single loss of the entire journey, achieved with nothing supernatural at all. And Polyphemus, son of Poseidon, sealed his cave with a boulder no ordinary strength could move, working through Odysseus's men methodically until cunning finally answered where force couldn't. A sharpened stake, wine strong enough to put a giant to sleep, and a false name, no body, clever enough to turn his own cry for help into nonsense. The escape worked perfectly. What undid it was pride. Odysseus shouted his real name back across the water, and Polyphemus's prayer to his father Poseidon is the exact reason the journey home stretched into 10 more years. Trace every one of these back far enough and the family resemblance is impossible to miss. A father who nearly unseated a god, women punished for surviving what was done to them, storms and whirlpools that never needed a personality to be lethal, and a handful of monsters who, looked at closely, were simply someone else's home standing in a hero's way. Greek mythology didn't invent 15 separate nightmares, it kept returning, generation after generation, to the same few sources: power, grief, nature, and the uncomfortable truth that the traveller isn't always the hero of the story he thinks he's in. If tracing these roots back to where they started interested you, stay a while, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which branch of this family tree you'd want us to dig into deeper next. Because there's always another root beneath the one you already know.